Some days don't break you all at once. They grind you down. One lost patient, one silent hallway, one old injury screaming back to life. Avery thought this was just another night like that. Sadness clung to her like damp air as she pulled into a quiet diner, hoping for 5 minutes of peace. Then the door burst open. Fear hit faster than thought. Shouts, shaking hands, a gun raised too high and pointed the wrong way. In one frozen heartbeat, a young soldier stood up and became a target. What happened next shocked everyone. A body moved before the mind could stop it. A choice made in 3 seconds. And when the noise faded, what remained wasn't tragedy, but a miracle that would change them all forever. The emergency room never truly slept. It only changed rhythms. Sirens instead of silence. Fluorescent light instead of daylight. The steady beep of monitors replacing the sound of breath when things went wrong. Avery Lane had been on her feet for 14 hours. Her scrubs were wrinkled and stained in places she hadn't noticed yet. Blood that wasn't hers. Saline dried into pale streaks. The smell of antiseptic clung to her skin, sharp enough to cut through exhaustion. She moved from bed to bed with practiced efficiency, hands steady, voice calm, eyes focused on the work and nothing else. Patient in room 4 coded twice. They got him back the first time, lost him the second. Room 7 was a child with a broken arm, crying more from fear than pain. Avery knelt to the child's level, explained every step before she did it, and didn't leave until the tears slowed. In room 9, an elderly woman held Avery's wrist with surprising strength and asked if she was going to die tonight. Not tonight, Avery said, because sometimes certainty was the most powerful medicine available. She didn't talk much beyond what was necessary. No small talk, no jokes at the nurse's station, no lingering after cases wrapped. She worked like a machine designed for one purpose: stabilize, treat, move on. The others noticed. They always did. "Lane, you okay?" someone asked as she washed her hands for the 100th time that day. "I'm fine," Avery replied automatically. She was always fine. Her left leg throbbed in a way that had nothing to do with fatigue. It was a deep, familiar pain, bone deep, sharp around the joint, flaring every time she shifted her weight wrong. She favored it slightly, unconsciously, the way people did when they'd learned to live with damage instead of fixing it. 8 years ago, someone had suggested surgery. She'd declined. Some things were meant to stay. At 2:17 a.m., the trauma bay finally went quiet. No incoming ambulances, no overhead pages, just the hum of lights and the distant echo of footsteps down the corridor. Avery peeled off her gloves and stared at the wall for a moment longer than necessary. Dr. Caldwell passed by, slowing. "You've been here since yesterday." Avery nodded once. "Go home," he said gently. "You're not doing anyone favors staying past this point." She didn't answer right away. She finished logging vitals, signed her chart, wiped down the counter with the same precision she used on patients. Then she nodded again. "See you tomorrow," she said. He watched her go with the expression people wore when they sensed there was something about a person they didn't know how to reach. The parking lot outside St. Mercy Hospital was slick with rain. Port Harbor nights carried the ocean in the air, salt and damp and cold that slipped through clothes and settled into joints. Avery unlocked her truck, climbed inside, and sat there for a moment, with her hands resting on the steering wheel. She didn't turn on the radio. She never did. The drive home took 20 minutes along the coast highway. Waves broke somewhere beyond the darkness, unseen but loud enough to remind her they were there. Streetlights blurred through the rain, streaks of gold against black. She should have driven straight home. She was exhausted down to her bones, the kind of tired that made thoughts slow and heavy, that blurred the edges of memory. But the image of the man in room 4 wouldn't leave her mind. The way his wife's face collapsed when the monitor went flat. The sound she made when she understood what that line meant. Avery exhaled slowly and tightened her grip on the wheel. At the next intersection, she didn't turn toward her apartment. She went straight. Harborline Diner sat on the corner of Seabrook and 9th, its neon sign buzzing faintly in the rain. It was the kind of place that hadn't changed in decades. Red vinyl booths, chipped mugs, a counter worn smooth by elbows and years. The windows glowed warm against the night. Avery parked and went inside. The bell above the door chimed softly. The diner was nearly empty. Late-night quiet. A couple at the far end sharing fries. A trucker nursing coffee at the counter. The air smelled like bacon grease and old coffee and something sweet baking in the back. "Usual?" the waitress asked without looking up. Avery nodded. She slid into the same booth she always chose. Not the one by the window, too exposed. Not the one in the corner, too boxed in. This booth had a clear view of the entrance, the counter, and the hallway leading to the restrooms and kitchen. She wrapped both hands around the mug when it arrived, letting the heat sink into her palms. This place didn't ask questions. She liked that. Avery sat in silence, watching the rain streak down the glass. Her leg pulsed beneath the table, pain rising and falling like a tide. She shifted slightly, found a position where it hurt less, and stayed still. She didn't notice how alert she was until the door opened again. The bell chimed. She glanced up, reflexive, automatic. A young man stepped inside, rainwater dripping from the hem of his jacket. He wore desert camouflage, faded and creased, the kind that had been lived in. A worn duffel bag hung from one shoulder. His hair was cropped short, his posture rigid in a way civilians rarely carried. He paused just inside the door. Not long, half a second, maybe less, but long enough. His eyes swept the room. Exits, corners, hands. Avery felt something tighten in her chest. The young man chose a stool at the counter with his back to the wall, set his bag at his feet, careful to keep it within reach. When the waitress approached, he startled slightly at the sound of her voice, then covered it with an awkward smile. "Coffee," he said. "And apple pie." Avery looked back down at her mug. She told herself it was nothing. People came back from places like that all the time. They needed time, space, the courtesy of being ignored while they relearned how to exist in rooms that didn't want to kill them. She respected that, so she stayed where she was, but she watched him anyway. The way his shoulders stayed tight, the way his hand twitched once toward his hip before stopping, fingers curling into nothing. The way a clatter of silverware made him flinch, just barely. Old instincts. The coffee in Avery's mug went untouched. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming against the roof. The diner felt like a pocket of calm carved out of the storm. Warm, steady, fragile. Avery didn't know why she felt uneasy. She didn't know that this was the last quiet moment she would have for a very long time. She took a slow breath, staring at the reflection of the neon sign in the window, and let the warmth of the mug anchor her to the present. For now, this was just a diner. Just a night. Just another place to rest before going home. The diner tried to pretend nothing had changed. Maggie's ceiling fan kept turning slow circles. The neon sign in the window kept buzzing like a tired insect. A soft country song played from the old jukebox, low enough to be background, not conversation. Coffee steamed. Plates clinked. The rain kept tapping at the glass as if it wanted to be let in. But Avery Lane felt it anyway, an invisible shift in the room. The young Marine at the counter wasn't doing anything wrong. He wasn't loud. He wasn't rude. He didn't demand attention. If anything, he was trying to take up as little space as possible, like he didn't trust the world to let him exist safely in it. That was what made him impossible to ignore. Avery stared down into her coffee, letting it cool between her hands. She told herself she was just resting, that she was only here for 10 minutes, maybe 15. A reset button before she went back to an empty apartment, and a mind that wouldn't shut off, but her eyes kept lifting on their own. The Marine sat with his spine straight, shoulders tight. He didn't lean, didn't slouch, didn't relax. His duffel bag stayed tucked close to his boot like it mattered. Every time the door chimed, his head turned just slightly before he stopped himself, as if he'd remembered that wasn't normal here. The waitress, Beth tonight, set a thick slice of apple pie in front of him, the kind of pie that should have felt like comfort. Cinnamon, warm crust, a scoop of melting vanilla ice cream sliding slowly down the side. "Welcome home, honey," Beth said gently. He nodded like he didn't know what to do with kindness. "No, thanks." He picked up his fork and took a bite. Chewed, swallowed. No expression, no pleasure, just motion. Avery recognized the look on his face because she'd worn it once, too. The look of someone doing the performance of normal while their nervous system screamed that nothing was normal. She should have looked away. She should have let him be. That was the respectful thing, the quiet agreement between veterans who didn't want to talk about what they carried. Avery believed in that rule, but something in her kept watching him, like a part of her had been assigned to this man without anyone asking. She watched the way his eyes tracked movement, not faces. The way he noticed the man at the far booth reaching into his jacket, only for it to be a phone. The way he flinched when a spoon dropped behind the counter. The way his hands clenched and unclenched, flexing like they needed something to do. He wasn't dangerous. He was wired. Still in the war, even with pie in front of him. Avery's left leg throbbed. She shifted slightly, the ache reminding her she wasn't a machine, no matter how hard she tried to pretend. Her fingers tightened around the mug. She'd come here to stop thinking, and now she was thinking anyway. The Marine turned his head just enough that Avery caught a better look at his face. He was young, early 20s, but his eyes were older than his age, the way eyes got when they'd seen too much too fast. A thin, pale scar cut along the edge of his jaw like a line drawn by something sharp. His hands had small healing scrapes. Fresh, but not civilian fresh. Training yard fresh. His uniform was worn in a way that meant it had belonged to him for a while. Not a costume. A life. Beth poured more coffee into his mug and gave him a smile that was meant to be gentle. "You passing through? We don't get many Marines in town." He hesitated like the answer required calculation. "Just got in," he said finally. "Leave starts. Tonight." "Then you picked the right place," Beth replied. "We take care of our own around here." Avery's throat tightened at those words. Our own. The Marine nodded again, but his eyes didn't soften. He looked like a man waiting for the floor to drop out from under him. The bell above the door chimed. Someone entered, shaking off rain. The Marine's hand moved toward his hip and stopped. He stared at his own hand for half a second, like it had betrayed him. Avery felt a cold line of understanding slide down her spine. 2 days home, she guessed. Maybe less. Still reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. Still expecting the world to come apart. Avery's coffee tasted like nothing. She kept her gaze on the window, but she listened to everything. She listened the way she had listened in tents lit by headlamps and red emergency lights, in places where sound meant life or death. A spoon scraped a plate. A chair leg squealed against tile. The fan ticked once with a lazy wobble. The Marine's fork tapped against the ceramic. Tap, 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 a steady rhythm, a coping mechanism. Avery could almost see the thoughts behind his eyes, the invisible checklist running in his head. Where are the exits? Where is cover? Who is a threat? What happens if... The door chimed again. Avery glanced up. 2 teenage boys came in, laughing too loud, dripping rain, pushing each other like the world had never hurt them. They slid into a booth near the window, still smiling. The Marine's shoulders eased a fraction when he realized they weren't a threat. Then he caught himself easing. His posture snapped back to rigid, like relaxing was a mistake. Avery's grip on the mug tightened until her knuckles went pale. She didn't want to talk to him. Talking meant connection. Connection meant risk. And Avery Lane did not do risk. At least not the kind that involved feelings. She had risked enough in one lifetime. Still, she found herself picturing him outside this diner in the storm, alone with whatever he carried. She pictured him trying to sleep in a silent room while his mind played back sounds no one else could hear. She pictured him waking up reaching for a rifle that wasn't there and feeling stupid for it. She pictured him walking through Port Harbor with his head on a swivel, exhausted by daylight. Avery had lived that chapter. She knew where it led. It led to isolation, to anger, to guilt, to the kind of loneliness that felt safer than love. Her phone buzzed once on the table, an automated reminder from the hospital system about her next shift. Avery ignored it. The Marine stared at his pie like it was a math problem, took another bite, slower this time. The ice cream had melted into a sweet pool. He swallowed. His eyes lifted, unfocused, as if he were looking beyond the diner walls. Then his gaze flicked, precise, and landed, briefly, on Avery, just for a heartbeat. Avery's stomach tightened. The look wasn't rude. It wasn't invasive. It was recognition, the way one soldier recognized another even in civilian skin. The way trauma recognized trauma. Avery looked away first. Her pulse thumped in her throat. She told herself it meant nothing, but she couldn't stop thinking, he sees me. Beth returned with a refill for Avery. You okay, Avery? Avery nodded without looking up. Fine. Beth set the pot down and lowered her voice a touch. That young man. He's been staring at the door since he sat down. Avery's eyes stayed on her mug. He's just tired. Beth hesitated. You know him? No. Beth studied her for a second, like she didn't believe the word no contained the full truth. Then she sighed softly. Well, if he needs anything, I hope he asks. Avery didn't answer. She didn't trust her voice. Because if she did answer, she might say something she hadn't said in years. I know what he needs. The Marine pushed his plate away like he couldn't finish it. His fork lay perfectly straight across the pie tin. His hands flattened on the counter for a moment, fingers spread, as if he needed to feel something solid beneath him. Then he reached down, opened his duffel bag, and pulled out a folded paper. A letter. A discharge sheet? No, Avery realized, watching the way he held it. A photograph. He stared at it like it was both a lifeline and a wound. His jaw tightened. He tucked it back into the bag quickly when Beth approached, like he didn't want anyone to see. Avery felt that in her chest, sharp and familiar, because she understood hiding grief in plain sight. She had made a career out of it. The Marine lifted his coffee, but his hand trembled slightly. He set it back down, exhaled, and pressed his thumb against the edge of the mug like he was grounding himself. Outside, a car pulled into the parking lot. Avery saw it only because she had chosen her booth for the view. Black sedan, dark tint, engine idling. It stayed on for a beat too long. Then the headlights shut off. The rain made the windshield shine, but Avery could still see the outline of two people inside. Maybe three. Her skin prickled. Not fear, exactly. Something colder. Training. Her mind marked the car, filed it away, then tried to dismiss it. People waited in cars all the time, checking phones, taking shelter from rain, picking someone up. It was nothing. It had to be nothing. Avery stared down into her coffee again and forced her hands to relax around the mug. The Marine shifted on his stool. His eyes flicked toward the window, toward the parking lot. He noticed the car, too. Avery saw the moment his body registered it. Shoulders tightening, chin lowering slightly, eyes sharpening. He was watching. So was she. Avery's leg throbbed harder, as if warning her. For the first time since she'd walked into Harbor Line Diner, Avery Lane wished she had just driven home, because the calm in this room suddenly felt like the kind of calm that came right before impact. And somewhere deep inside her, the part she'd tried to bury for 8 years, something woke up and whispered, "Pay attention." The bell above the diner door chimed again. The sound cut through the room sharper than it should have, thin and metallic, like something brittle snapping under pressure. Avery's eyes lifted at the exact same moment as the Marines. 3 men stepped inside. They didn't rush. They didn't shout right away. They moved with a confidence that felt wrong for a late-night diner soaked in rain and grease and coffee. Hooded jackets, ski masks pulled low, gloves. The first man stayed near the door, broad shoulders filling the frame like a barricade. The second drifted toward the counter, eyes scanning fast and unfocused. The third hung back half a step, his posture too precise, movements controlled in a way that set Avery's nerves on edge. The door closed behind them. The bell chimed once more. Silence followed. Thick, heavy, unnatural. Avery didn't move. Neither did the Marine. Her mind had already shifted gears. 3 threats, 1 entrance, no immediate cover except the counter and the booths, civilians frozen in place. 1 trained fighter at the counter. 1 trained medic in a booth who had promised herself she was done with this kind of math. The man near the door raised his weapon first, not wildly, not shaking, just enough to make the point. "Everybody stay where you are," he said. His voice was calm. Too calm. The couple at the far booth gasped. The trucker's coffee mug slipped from his fingers and shattered on the tile. Someone whimpered near the restrooms. Avery watched hands. That was the first rule. Hands told the truth long before faces did. The second man, the jittery one, gripped his gun too tight. His finger hovered close to the trigger, sweat visible even through the dim light. His breathing came fast and shallow, chest rising like he'd just run a mile. Dangerous, unpredictable. The third man hadn't raised his weapon yet. That was worse. He stood slightly angled, weight balanced, eyes moving in clean lines across the room. He wasn't looking at faces. He was mapping positions, distance, obstacles, training. Avery felt a cold certainty settle in her stomach. That one knows what he's doing. "Wallets!" Phones! The jittery man snapped, voice cracking. Now! Chairs scraped. Hands shook as people fumbled pockets open. The Marine stayed still. Too still. Avery saw it immediately. The way his shoulders locked. The way his jaw tightened. His body wasn't reacting like a civilian under threat. It was reacting like a soldier waiting for contact. Avery wanted to scream at him without opening her mouth. Don't move. But it was already happening. The Marine shifted on his stool just a few inches. A subtle adjustment meant to give him leverage, a better angle if things went bad. The trained man saw it. Avery watched the moment recognition flashed in the masked eyes. Quick, sharp, deadly, a fellow professional, a threat that needed neutralizing. The barrel of his weapon pivoted, not toward the crowd, toward the Marine. Avery's pulse slammed into her ears. No. Time slowed in the way it only did when violence was about to erupt. She saw everything at once. The way the jittery man's hands shook harder now. The way the man by the door glanced outside, nervous, calculating how long they could stay. The way Beth stood frozen behind the counter, eyes wide, knuckles white where she gripped the edge. And the Marine, Eli, was halfway to standing before he realized what he was doing. Muscle memory, a lifetime of conditioning screaming move first or die. "Hey!" someone started to say. The trained man fired a warning shot into the ceiling. The explosion of sound was deafening in the small space. Plaster rained down. The lights flickered. Someone screamed. Avery didn't flinch. Her mind snapped into absolute clarity. The Marine froze mid-rise, shock flashing across his face as the reality of where he was finally caught up to where his body thought he was. The trained man adjusted his stance, lowering the weapon just enough to aim center mass. Avery understood with terrifying certainty. If I do nothing, he dies. Not maybe, not eventually. Here, now, in this diner. Because his body remembered war better than it remembered peace. The jittery man laughed, a thin, hysterical sound. "Sit down! Sit the hell down!" But his hands were shaking worse now, finger brushing the trigger again and again like it couldn't help itself. The man by the door swore under his breath. "Hurry it up!" Everything was unraveling. Avery's legs screamed as she shifted her weight under the booth. Pain flared hot and sharp, but she welcomed it. Pain meant she was here. Present. Alive. She had 8 years to walk away from moments like this. 8 years of telling herself she'd earned the right to be done, and now the universe had dropped another one at her feet anyway. Avery's gaze locked on the Marine's profile. She saw fear there, not for himself, but for the people behind him. The same fear she'd seen in 19-year-olds on metal tables under flickering lights. He was about to move again. Avery didn't give herself time to think. Thinking was how you talked yourself out of doing the thing you knew was right. She pushed out of the booth. Her voice cut through the chaos, sharp and commanding, carrying the weight of authority she hadn't used in years. "Down. Now!" The Marine reacted instantly. Training beat confusion. He dropped, and Avery launched forward. Her body hit him hard, shoulder driving into his chest, arms wrapping around him as they went down behind the counter. They crashed to the tile together, breath knocked from her lungs. The shot came half a second later. A thunderclap at close range. Avery felt the impact before she heard it, a brutal force slamming into her left thigh, heat and pressure exploding outward. Her vision whited out for a heartbeat. Pain followed, searing and absolute. She didn't scream. She clamped down on instinct and rolled, spreading her body over the Marines, making herself as wide as possible, maximum coverage, Minimum exposure. The Marine struggled beneath her, panic flooding his eyes as understanding hit. "You're hit!" he started. "Stay down," Avery hissed, her voice steady despite the fire tearing through her leg. "That's an order." Blood soaked into the tile beneath them, warm and spreading fast. Avery could feel it pulsing with her heartbeat, slick and terrifyingly familiar. The jittery man shouted something incoherent. Another shot went wild, shattering a light fixture near the kitchen. Glass rained down. Someone cried out. The trained man swore. "We're done! Move!" The man by the door yanked it open. Sirens wailed somewhere in the distance, faint but growing. The trained man hesitated, eyes flicking back to the counter, to Avery shielding the Marine. For a split second, Avery met his gaze. He saw what she was. Not a civilian, not prey. A problem. But not one worth dying for tonight. "Go, go!" someone yelled. Footsteps thundered. The door slammed. The bell chimed again, absurdly cheerful. Then the engine outside roared to life and tore away into the rain. Silence crashed down on the diner. Not peace. Shock. Avery stayed where she was, muscles locked, body screaming. She kept herself pressed over the Marine until she was certain they were gone. Only then did she let out the breath she'd been holding. Her leg felt wrong, too loose, too numb, too hot. The Marine's hands trembled as he pressed against her shoulders. "You're bleeding. You're bleeding bad." "Check the others," Avery said. Her voice sounded far away, like it belonged to someone else. "Anyone hit?" Beth was already moving, towels in hand, face pale but determined. The trucker crawled out from under the counter. The couple at the booth clung to each other, shaking but alive. "No one else," Beth said. "Just you." Avery nodded once. Good. That was good. Her vision narrowed, edges darkening, the ceiling lights blurred. The Marine's face hovered above her, terrified and furious all at once. "Why would you do that?" Avery tried to smile. "Because you were about to die," she said simply. The sirens were louder now. Red and blue light washed through the windows, flashing across the diner walls like a pulse. Avery focused on that light and breathed through the pain, one slow inhale at a time. She had made her choice, and there was no taking it back. The world did not stop when the gunman ran. It fractured. Sound returned in broken pieces. Someone sobbing near the restrooms. The clatter of a chair knocked over. Beth's voice somewhere above Avery's head saying her name again and again like it was a rope she could hold on to. Sirens grew louder, layered and urgent, echoing off wet pavement outside. Avery stayed where she was. She knew better than to move. Pain had rules. Blood had rules. Panic did not. Her left leg burned and throbbed in violent waves, a heat so intense it felt unreal, as if the limb no longer belonged to her. She could feel blood pooling beneath her hip, warm against the tile, spreading faster than it should have. She pressed her weight down instinctively, trying to slow it, the way she'd done 100 times before. Pressure first, questions later. Eli's hands hovered, useless and shaking, not knowing where to go. "You're bleeding," he said again, louder now, like volume might fix it. "You're bleeding a lot." "I know," Avery replied. Her voice sounded calm to her own ears. That was good. Calm meant control. "Stay down," she told him, even as she began to shift, careful, deliberate. "You're safe. They're gone." He didn't believe it yet. His eyes were too wide, his breathing too fast. He kept looking past her shoulder toward the door, expecting the masks to come back, expecting the sound of another shot. Avery slid her hand beneath her thigh and came away wet. Too wet. "Beth," she called, keeping her voice even. "Towels. As many as you have." Beth was already there, dropping to her knees beside them, hands shaking but determined. She tore a roll of paper towels open with her teeth, pressed them hard against Avery's leg where the blood was worst. Avery hissed despite herself, white-hot pain lancing through her. "Sorry," Beth whispered. "Don't be," Avery said. "Harder." Beth pressed harder. The diner smelled like coffee and ozone and fear. Glass crunched under someone's shoe. The ceiling fan ticked unevenly where the bullet had grazed it, each rotation a reminder of how close it had come. Eli tried to help, then froze again, paralyzed by the sight of blood soaking through towel after towel. His hands were slick, his breath ragged. "Hey," Avery said sharply. He snapped his gaze to her. "Look at me," she ordered. He did. "Count with me," she said. "Slow, in through your nose, out through your mouth." "Now," she said. He obeyed. 1, 2, 3. His breathing steadied a fraction. Good. Avery closed her eyes briefly, letting the training surface fully, pushing aside the part of her that wanted to scream, to curl inward, to be done. This was familiar territory. This was where she knew what to do. "Phone," she said. "Call 911 if you haven't already. Tell them gunshot wound, female, left leg, significant bleeding." "I did," Beth said quickly. "They're coming." Avery nodded. Red and blue lights flashed brighter through the windows now, strobing across the diner walls, across faces pale with shock. The sirens cut off outside. Boots pounded on pavement. Avery felt her pulse stutter, then surge. Her vision narrowed at the edges. Tunneling. "Not yet," she told herself. "Stay." "Eli," she said, turning her head slightly. "I need you to do something." His name coming from her mouth seemed to anchor him. "Anything," he said. "Good," she replied. "I want you to keep pressure right here." She guided his hands, placing them where the blood flowed hardest. He flinched when his fingers sank into warmth, but he didn't pull away. "Do not let go," she said. "No matter what." His jaw clenched. "I won't." She believed him. The front door burst open and cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of rain and diesel. Police flooded the diner, voices overlapping, commands sharp and fast. "Hands where we can see them! Weapon down! EMS is on the way!" Someone knelt beside Avery, flashlight beam dancing across her leg. "Well, ma'am, can you hear me?" "Yes," Avery said. "I'm conscious." "Where are you hit?" "Left thigh. Possible arterial involvement," she answered automatically. The officer paused, flashlight steadying. "You medical?" "Yes." He nodded once and moved on, barking orders to secure the scene. Paramedics rushed in seconds later, equipment clattering. They cut away Avery's pant leg, exposing the wound. Eli sucked in a sharp breath, but kept his hands where she'd told him. The medic swore softly under his breath. "Femur," he said to his partner. "Entry and exit. She's losing a lot." "I know," Avery said. "Tourniquet won't hold long there. Pack it tight." The medic looked at her, surprised. Then his expression shifted to something like respect. "Okay," he said. "We're with you." They worked fast. Pressure, bandages. IV line sliding into her arm with a sting she barely registered. The pain in her leg dulled, replaced by a heavy, creeping numbness that scared her more than the fire had. "Stay with me," the medic said. "I am," Avery replied. They lifted her onto a stretcher. The movement sent a fresh wave of agony through her body, and this time she couldn't stop the sound that tore out of her. a raw, broken cry that surprised them all. Eli grabbed her hand. She squeezed back, hard. "Don't," she whispered. "Let go." "I won't," he said, voice breaking. "I promise." They wheeled her out into the rain. The night was a blur of light and motion, umbrellas, radios crackling, faces streaked with water and shock. The ambulance doors slammed shut, sealing her inside with the steady rhythm of the engine and the smell of disinfectant. As the vehicle lurched forward, Avery stared at the ceiling and let herself breathe. 3 seconds. That was all it had taken. 3 seconds to decide she wasn't done being who she was. 3 seconds to undo 8 years of distance and denial. Her mind drifted despite her efforts, slipping back to another place, another time. Canvas walls snapping in desert wind, the metallic smell of blood and sand. A young soldier on a table asking if he was going to make it. "Stay with me," she had told him then too. The medic's voice cut through the memory. "Blood pressure's dropping." Avery felt it. The heaviness. The pull. "No," she murmured. "Not yet." She focused on Eli's face, hovering at the edge of her vision. His fingers laced through hers, knuckles white. "You're going to be okay," he said desperately. "You saved me. I won't forget this. Ever." Avery managed a faint smile. "That wasn't," she said, breath shallow, "why I did it." The ambulance hit a bump, jolting her leg. Stars burst behind her eyes. She bit down hard, tasting copper. As they turned onto the highway toward the hospital, Avery's grip slackened despite her will. The medic noticed immediately. Hey, stay with us." "I'm here," Avery whispered, though the darkness pressed close now, thick and insistent. She thought of the diner, the warmth, the pie, the brief illusion of safety. She thought of the Marine she'd covered with her body without knowing his name. And she realized, with a strange, aching clarity, that this was the moment she had been running from since the war. Not the pain, not the blood, but the truth. That when the moment came again, because it always did, she would always choose the same way. The siren wailed into the night as Avery Lane fought to stay conscious, her life balanced on the thin edge of those 3 irreversible seconds. White light swallowed everything. It was the first thing Avery noticed when she surfaced. Too bright, too clean, too close. It pressed against her eyelids even before she managed to open them, a sterile sun that burned away shadow and sleep. The air smelled different here, not like coffee and rain and fear. Antiseptic, plastic, cold metal. She tried to move. Pain answered. It surged up her left side in a brutal, unmistakable wave that stole her breath and left a sharp cry lodged in her throat. Avery's fingers curled reflexively, grasping for something solid, but all she caught was air. "Easy," a voice said quickly. "Don't move." Avery forced her eyes open. Ceiling panels slid past above her, rectangles of white interrupted by the blurred outlines of faces leaning in and out of view. Blue scrubs, masks, caps. A hand appeared in her peripheral vision, pressing gently against her shoulder. "You're in the OR," the voice continued. Calm, professional. "You're safe." Avery swallowed, throat dry. "My leg." "We know," another voice said, lower, older. "We're taking care of it." The gurney stopped. Hands were everywhere now, efficient and practiced. They cut away the rest of her pant leg, peeled back blood-soaked fabric, assessed the damage in fast, quiet phrases that drifted in and out of her awareness. Through and through. Fragmentation. Femurs compromised. Pressures still dropping. Avery closed her eyes. She knew these words, had said them herself, had heard them whispered over bodies that didn't always make it out of rooms like this. A mask lowered over her face. "Oxygen," someone said. She inhaled. The air tasted sharp and artificial. "Any allergies?" a woman asked close to her ear. "No," Avery managed. "Any prior injuries?" Avery hesitated. This was the moment she usually avoided. The part where she let people believe the story was simpler than it was. Where she stayed quiet and let the past remain buried under clean paperwork and polite lies. But lying here, bleeding, with her legs screaming and her vision blurring at the edges, felt like a poor time for half-truths. "Yes," she said. "Left leg." The room stilled for half a beat. "What kind of injury?" the woman asked carefully. "Shrapnel," Avery replied. 8 years ago." Someone swore under their breath. Avery felt the table shift as they transferred her, the movement sending a fresh spike of pain tearing through her body. Her back arched involuntarily before firm hands steadied her. "You've been walking on that?" a man asked incredulously. "Yes," Avery said. "How long?" "Since it happened." Silence followed. Not judgment, just shock. "We'll need imaging," the older voice said. "Now." The lights dimmed briefly as equipment whirred to life. Avery stared at the edges of the room, fighting the creeping darkness tugging at her consciousness. "Stay awake," she told herself. "Stay useful." She focused on counting breaths the way she'd taught others to do. In, out, in, out. Her mind drifted despite her efforts, slipping through time the way it always did when pain loosened the locks she kept tight. Canvas walls snapping in desert wind, red light washing over sand and skin, a young man's voice asking if he was going to die, trying to sound brave. "Stay with me," she told him then. Now the words echoed back, hollow and distant. "Avery." She blinked. The older voice again, closer now. A woman this time, eyes visible above her mask, steady, sharp, familiar. Dr. Hale. They'd worked together for years. "You never mentioned this injury," Dr. Hale said quietly. Avery's lips twitched. "Didn't seem relevant." Dr. Hale's eyes softened for just a moment before she straightened. "It is now." They rolled the X-ray screen into place. Images flickered to life, bone rendered in ghostly white, damage stark and undeniable. Avery didn't need the explanation. She saw it immediately. Metal fragments embedded deep in the femur. Old, healed around. A fracture line from the bullet intersecting the weakened bone like fate with terrible timing. "This complicates things," the surgeon said. "How bad?" Avery asked. He didn't sugarcoat it. "Best case, you keep the leg. Worst case, you don't." Avery absorbed that without flinching. "Do what you need to do," she said. "Just," her voice faltered, "don't let me bleed out." Dr. Hale nodded. "We won't." They moved fast after that. Anesthesia flowed through her IV, cold and heavy. The room blurred, sounds stretched and warped, voices echoing as if down a long tunnel. Avery felt herself slipping. "No," she murmured. "Not yet." A hand squeezed hers. "Hey," someone said. "Stay with us." She tried. She really did. But the darkness surged anyway, thick and insistent, pulling her under like deep water. When consciousness returned, it came in fragments. Pressure on her chest. A sharp voice calling numbers. The sound of a monitor screaming its displeasure. Her body jerked violently as hands pressed down hard, rhythmic and unforgiving. Chest compressions. The knowledge cut through the haze with terrifying clarity. I'm coding. No, Avery thought. Or maybe she said it. She wasn't sure. She tried to breathe and couldn't, tried to move and failed. Panic flared, raw and instinctive, before training buried it beneath resignation. So this is how it ends. The thought was distant, almost calm. "Come on," someone urged. "Come back." Avery felt herself floating, light and detached, as if the pain that had anchored her was fading away. And then, a jolt. Her body convulsed as electricity tore through her chest, snapping her back into herself with brutal force. Pain exploded. Air rushed into her lungs in a desperate gasp. The monitor changed its tune. "Rhythm's back," someone said, disbelief threading their voice. "We've got her." Avery coughed weakly, tears leaking from the corners of her eyes as oxygen flooded her starved body. Dr. Hale leaned over her, eyes fierce. "You don't get to leave," she said firmly. "Not tonight." Avery tried to smile. "Wasn't planning on it," she whispered. They took her under again after that. Deeper this time, sedation wrapping her in darkness without dreams. Hours later, far from the OR's harsh lights, Avery lay still beneath clean sheets in the ICU. Machines hummed softly around her. Tubes and lines traced her body like quiet sentinels. Her left leg was immobilized, heavy and distant, pain muted to a dull ache by medication. Outside the glass walls, a single figure sat hunched forward in a plastic chair. Eli. He hadn't moved. His clothes were clean now, borrowed scrubs replacing blood-soaked fabric, but his hands were clasped together so tightly his knuckles had gone white. He stared through the glass at Avery's motionless form, eyes burning with a mixture of fear and something else, something heavier. A nurse approached him gently. "She's stable," she said. "Surgery was rough, but she made it." Eli let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. It came out shaky, almost a sob. "Can I see her?" "In a little while," the nurse replied. "She needs rest." He nodded, swallowing hard. As the night deepened and the hospital settled into its own quiet rhythm, Avery's fingers twitched beneath the sheets. A faint movement. A sign. Somewhere beneath sedation and exhaustion, her body was still fighting, still choosing to stay. Avery woke to sound before sight, not alarms. Those had faded into a distant, steady hum. But voices. Low. Careful. The kind people used when they didn't want to wake someone who might break if pulled too hard back into the world. She kept her eyes closed. Her body felt heavy, anchored to the bed by gravity and tubing and pain, dulled to a deep, throbbing ache. Her left leg was a weight she could feel but not quite claim as her own. Each breath scraped faintly in her chest, measured and assisted by the quiet rhythm of machines. "She's stable," a nurse said. But it was close. Another voice answered, male, younger, tense. "How close?" A pause. Then, "Too close." Avery swallowed. So she was still here. She didn't know how to feel about that yet. When she finally opened her eyes, the ICU ceiling swam into focus. Pale tiles, soft light. The glass wall beyond her bed reflected a blurred version of herself. Tubes, bandages, hair plastered back with sweat. Dr. Hale stood at the foot of the bed, arms crossed, watching her with the expression Avery knew well. The look doctors wore when relief and anger lived side by side. "Don't," Avery murmured, voice dry and thin. Dr. Hale's mouth twitched. "Don't what?" "Give me that look." "You coded on my table," Dr. Hale said. "I'm allowed the look." Avery closed her eyes again. "Fair." Dr. Hale stepped closer. "You scared us." Avery didn't answer. She didn't know how to explain that fear had never been the problem. "How's the leg?" Avery asked instead. Dr. Hale hesitated, You kept it. Avery exhaled, slow and careful. Walking? Eventually, Dr. Hale said. Not the way you used to. You've got hardware in there now, plates, screws, and the old fragments, we left them. Taking them out would have done more harm than good. Avery nodded faintly. She'd expected as much. Recovery will be long, Dr. Hale continued. And there's something else. Avery opened her eyes again. What? Dr. Hale's gaze shifted briefly toward the glass wall, where Avery could just make out a figure sitting outside. The man from the diner, she said. He hasn't left. Avery's chest tightened. He's been making calls, Dr. Hale added. At first we thought it was just checking in, but it's more than that. Avery said nothing, because she already knew. The thing about storms was that you felt the pressure change before the sky darkened. Eli Brooks stood in the hallway with his phone pressed to his ear, knuckles white. Yes, sir, he said quietly. I understand. He turned away from the nurse's station, lowering his voice further. No, sir. She didn't say anything. I don't think she wanted anyone to know. A pause. Yes, I'm sure. Another pause. Longer this time. I know she's not active duty, Eli said. But she didn't hesitate. She moved like she'd done it before. Like it was instinct. He listened, jaw tightening. Yes, sir. St. Mercy Hospital, Port Harbor. He ended the call and leaned back against the wall, staring at nothing. He hadn't meant for it to become this. He'd just needed to tell someone. Someone who would understand what it meant when a person threw themselves in front of a bullet without thinking. Someone who would know that wasn't luck or recklessness. That was training. That was identity. That was family. His phone buzzed again almost immediately. Another call, then another. Names he recognized. Numbers he hadn't seen in months. Some he hadn't spoken to since deployment. The message moved faster than he expected. Faster than the storm outside. By evening, the ICU felt different. Not louder, not crowded. Just aware. People lingered near Avery's room longer than necessary. Nurses she didn't know asked her name twice. A security guard nodded at Eli with something like respect, and then there was the woman. She arrived quietly, without announcement. No uniform, no camera, no hurry. She stood just outside the glass wall for a long moment before stepping forward, hands clasped in front of her, as if she were holding something fragile. She was older, late 60s maybe, silver threaded through dark hair pulled back neatly. Her posture was straight, her movements careful but purposeful. Eli noticed her first. "Can I help you?" he asked gently. The woman looked at him, eyes sharp with grief and resolve. "I'm looking for Avery Lane." Eli hesitated. "She's resting, family only right now." The woman nodded. "I understand." She reached into her bag and withdrew a small, worn envelope. The paper was creased, edges softened by time and handling. Avery's name was written across the front in ink that had faded but remained unmistakably deliberate. "I'm not family," the woman said softly, "but I think she'll want this." Eli stared at the envelope. "What is it?" The woman swallowed. "A letter." He looked back at the name, at the careful handwriting. "From who?" Her voice wavered for the first time. "From my son." Eli's chest tightened. 8 years ago, she continued. He asked me to find her if anything ever happened. I tried. I didn't know where to look. Then today, someone called. Gave me a name. A town. Her eyes flicked toward the ICU bed beyond the glass. "I think she's the reason my son came home at all," the woman said. "Even if only for a while." Eli didn't ask for details. He didn't need them. "I'll tell her," he said. The woman nodded once, relief softening her expression. "Thank you." Avery woke again to dusk settling outside the window. The sky beyond the ICU had turned a deep, bruised blue. Rain traced slow paths down the glass, steady and unrelenting. Dr. Hale returned, this time with a different look. "There's someone here," she said. "You don't have to see her." Avery frowned slightly. "Who?" Dr. Hale hesitated, then handed Avery the envelope. Avery's breath caught. She knew that handwriting. Her fingers trembled as she took it, the paper heavier than it had any right to be. "No," she whispered. Dr. Hale said nothing. Avery stared at the envelope for a long moment, chest rising and falling too fast. Memories pressed in around her. Canvas walls, red light, the sound of her own voice telling someone to hold on. "I can't," she said. "You don't have to read it now," Dr. Hale replied gently. Avery shook her head. "If I don't read it now, I never will." Dr. Hale squeezed her shoulder once and stepped back. Avery broke the seal with clumsy fingers. The paper inside unfolded slowly, as if resisting the light. She read the first line, then the second. Then she stopped breathing. Tears slid silently down her temples, soaking into the pillow. Her mouth trembled as she pressed the paper to her chest, pain blooming somewhere far deeper than her leg. She hadn't known. She hadn't known he'd written. She hadn't known he'd forgiven her before she could forgive herself. Avery squeezed her eyes shut as the weight of 8 years shifted, cracked, began, just barely, to loosen. Outside the room, Eli stood motionless, watching her through the glass. For the first time since the diner, he didn't feel like the one who'd been saved. He felt like a witness, and he understood something then, with sudden, aching clarity. Whatever Avery Lane had done today, whatever she had survived before this moment, this letter, might be the hardest fight of all. The room was quiet in a way Avery hadn't felt in years. Not the hollow quiet of an empty house or the forced silence she wrapped around herself after long shifts, but something heavier, intentional, as if the air itself was waiting. The letter rested in her hands. She hadn't finished reading it. She couldn't. After the first few lines, her body had betrayed her. Breath stuttering, chest tightening, vision blurring until the words dissolved into dark ink and memory. She'd folded the paper back into itself and held it there, pressed against her sternum like a bandage over something torn open. Dr. Hale had left without a word. The woman, the mother, hadn't come in yet. Avery lay still, staring at the ceiling, feeling the slow, painful truth settle into her bones. The past had found her. Not as accusation, not as punishment, but as an answer she'd spent 8 years refusing to hear. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded the paper again. The handwriting was unmistakable, slightly slanted, confident, familiar in a way that hurt. She began to read. "Avery, if you're reading this, then I didn't make it home the way we planned." Her throat closed. "I want you to stop right now if you're blaming yourself. I know you will. You always do. But listen to me for once, yeah? Just this once." Tears slid silently into her hair. "You saved me more times than I can count. Not just that day, but every day after. You showed me how to stay calm when everything was burning. You made me believe I could survive things that should have killed me." Her chest hitched. "I need you to know something important. If it ends here for me, it ends knowing I mattered, knowing I was fought for, knowing someone with your hands and your heart stood between me and the worst moment of my life. Avery's grip tightened on the paper. You didn't fail me. The sentence hit harder than the bullet ever had. If anything, you gave me more life than I was ever promised. Her breathing broke apart then, ragged, uneven. She pressed the letter to her mouth, a sound escaping her that was closer to a sob than a cry. The machines beside her ticked on, indifferent witnesses. She forced herself to keep reading. I know you'll try to disappear after this. You'll say it's easier. You'll say you're fine alone. But you don't get to vanish, Avery. Not after everything you've already survived. The words blurred. If you ever doubt that, if you ever feel like stopping, remember this. The world is better because you run toward danger, and someone out there is still alive because you didn't look away. Avery squeezed her eyes shut. 8 years. 8 years of carrying the moment where she'd lost him as proof that she wasn't enough. 8 years of counting saves like debts that never quite balanced. The letter shifted something deep inside her, didn't erase the pain, but reframed it, changed its shape. He hadn't died angry. He hadn't died believing she'd failed. He died knowing she tried, and that had to mean something. A soft knock came at the door. Avery didn't look up. Come in, she said quietly. The woman stepped inside. She moved slowly, as if afraid the floor might give way beneath her, eyes never leaving Avery's face. She carried herself with the careful strength of someone who had learned how to keep going after grief hollowed them out. My name is Margaret, she said gently, and I'm his mother. Avery swallowed hard. I'm sorry. Margaret shook her head. No, she said. I didn't come for that. She took the chair beside the bed, resting her hands in her lap. I came because my son talked about you like you were gravity, like things made sense when you were there. Avery stared at the blanket. He wrote that letter a week before the convoy, Margaret continued. He told me if anything happened, I was to find you, to make sure you didn't disappear. A bitter laugh escaped Avery. I did anyway. Margaret reached out and covered Avery's hand with her own. Her grip was warm, steady. Not completely, she said. You're still here. Avery nodded once, barely. I spent years wondering if I should have done more, Margaret said softly. If I should have fought harder to keep him home. But then I realized something. She met Avery's eyes. He died doing something he believed in, with people he trusted, and the person who fought for him until the end is still alive. Her voice broke just slightly. That matters. Avery's shoulders shook. For the first time, she didn't stop it. Later, Eli stood awkwardly in the doorway, hands jammed into the pockets of borrowed scrubs. I can come back, he said quickly. No, Avery replied. It's okay. He stepped inside, hesitating near the foot of the bed. He looked smaller without his uniform, younger, human. You scared me, he admitted. Avery let out a tired breath. I scare myself. He nodded, then gestured vaguely. People, they're asking about you, not press. Just people who want to help. Avery stiffened. I don't want this to become a thing. Eli held up a hand. It's not about that. He hesitated. Back at the diner, there was an older man, vet. He keeps asking if you're awake. Says you reminded him why he made it home. Avery closed her eyes. And just like that, the walls she'd built started to feel thin. I don't want to be a symbol, she said quietly. Eli met her gaze. You're not. He paused. You're a person who made a choice. People see themselves in that. Avery didn't answer, because part of her, the part she'd buried, understood. That night, Sleep came in fits, but for the first time in years, the dreams changed. There was still sand, still noise, still the echo of rotors and shouted commands. But there was also something new: distance, perspective. She saw herself from the outside, not as a failure frozen in one moment, but as a thread woven through many lives. Some cut short, some carried forward. When she woke, dawn was just beginning to lighten the sky. Avery turned her head toward the window, watching the first hint of color bleed into the horizon. "I'm still here," she whispered. And for the first time, the words didn't feel like a question. They felt like a decision. The sound came first. Not sirens, not shouting, footsteps. Avery lay half awake on the couch, the early morning light slanting in through the front window. Pain pulsed in her leg, present, familiar now, but quieter than it had been days ago. She shifted carefully, reaching for the cane propped beside the armrest. Then she heard it again. Footsteps, many of them, measured, unhurried, intentional. Her brow furrowed. Port Harbor was usually still at this hour, the town waking slowly, like a tide easing in. Whatever this was, it wasn't ordinary. Avery pushed herself upright and moved toward the door, each step deliberate. Her leg protested, but she ignored it, the way she always had. She paused with her hand on the knob, breathing once, steadying herself, then opened the door. The street was full, not crowded, not noisy, just full. They stood in a loose line stretching down the block. Neighbors, hospital staff in scrubs and jackets. The diner owner with flour still dusting her sleeves. The older veteran from the corner booth, heads bare, eyes forward. Eli stood near the front. He met Avery's gaze and nodded once. No one spoke. Instead, one by one, they placed a hand over their heart. Some bowed their heads. Others offered a simple nod, the kind exchanged between people who didn't need words to understand what had happened. Avery's throat tightened. "This is unnecessary," she said quietly, though her voice barely carried. Eli shook his head. "It's not?" Someone stepped forward. A nurse Avery recognized from the ER, eyes red-rimmed but smiling. "You told us to check on everyone else first," she said gently. "So we did." Avery blinked, caught off guard. "We're just here to check on you," the nurse added. Avery looked down the line again. There were no banners, no speeches, no applause, just presence. And somehow, that made it heavier. "I don't," Avery started, then stopped. For years, she'd known exactly what to say in moments of crisis, had commanded rooms, had made decisions that cut through chaos like a blade. But this wasn't chaos. This was gratitude. And she'd never learned how to stand in that without flinching. So she did the only thing that felt honest. She stepped outside. The cool morning air brushed her face. A faint mist hung low, remnants of last night's rain. Avery stood on the porch, cane planted firmly, shoulders squared. Not in defiance, but in acknowledgement. "Thank you," she said simply. No one replied. They didn't need to. After a moment, the line loosened. People lingered, offering quiet smiles, brief squeezes of her shoulder, small nods that carried entire conversations. Then, as naturally as they'd arrived, they drifted away, back to shifts and breakfasts and lives that continued because they could. Eli remained. "You okay?" he asked. Avery let out a breath. "I think so." He hesitated. "There's something else." She sighed. "Of course there is." He smiled faintly. "Not bad. I promise." It started small. A room at the community center, folding chairs, a borrowed projector that flickered when it warmed up, flyers printed on cheap paper, taped to shop windows and bus stops, harbor-ready community emergency response and veteran support. Avery stared at the sign the first day, arms crossed, skeptical. "This is not what I planned," she muttered. Eli shrugged. "You didn't plan the diner either." She shot him a look. "I mean," he added quickly, "you didn't plan to be there, but you were." That shut her up. The first session drew 12 people. By the third week, there were 30. Avery stood at the front of the room, cane resting against the table, explaining how fear worked, how the brain froze, how muscle memory mattered, how decisions made before a crisis could save lives during one. She didn't dramatize. She didn't posture. She taught. And people listened. Not because she'd been shot, but because she knew what she was talking about. After each session, a few veterans lingered. Some asked practical questions. Others didn't ask anything at all. Just stayed, hands shoved into pockets, eyes distant, grateful for a space that didn't demand explanations. Avery learned how to sit with that, how not to fix everything, how to let presence be enough. The rain returned one afternoon, light and steady, tapping against the windows as Avery finished locking up the center. Eli waited by the curb, jacket slung over his shoulder. "Walk you home?" he asked. "I can manage." "I know," he said. Still. She didn't argue. They moved slowly down the sidewalk, the town softened by wet pavement and muted color. Avery tested her weight carefully, adjusting her stride when her leg complained. Does it ever stop hurting?" Eli asked quietly. She considered the question. "The pain? Sometimes. And the rest?" Avery smiled faintly. "You learn where to put it." They reached her place, the porch light casting a warm circle against the gray afternoon. Avery paused before stepping up. "Eli." He looked at her. "You didn't have to stay," she said. "After the diner. After the hospital." "I know," he replied. "Why did you?" He took a moment. "Because you showed up for me when you didn't have to. And because someone once told me that's how we survive, by not walking away." Avery nodded. "That's fair." He smiled, relief flickering across his face. Good. That night, Avery sat at her kitchen table, papers spread out before her. Grant forms, schedules, handwritten notes from people who'd attended harbor-ready sessions. In the center lay the letter. Folded, worn, familiar. She didn't read it again. She didn't need to. She placed it carefully in a drawer, not hidden away, but kept. Outside, the rain slowed, then stopped. Avery rose and stepped onto the porch, breathing in the cool, clean air. The clouds were breaking apart, the last of the storm drifting out toward the horizon. Clear skies followed. Not because storms never came again, but because she now knew how to stand after them. Avery rested both hands on the railing, cane beside her, and allowed herself something new. Belonging. Not the kind that demanded perfection, the kind that stayed. She smiled to herself, quiet and real. Tomorrow there would be another session, another conversation, another chance to choose to stay. And this time, she would.